Captain Elena Vasquez watched the stars through the observation deck's massive window. The space station hung at the edge of known space, a quiet sentinel among the cosmic darkness. Around her, 30 crew members worked at their stations with practiced efficiency. The soft hum of computers and gentle beeping of sensors filled the air. Elena had been stationed here for 3 years now. The Galactic Consortium had assigned humans to monitor this sector, because they were good at watching and waiting. Other species grew impatient with such work. The warrior-like Vorthak wanted to patrol actively, flying their massive ships in shows of force. The highly advanced Nexari preferred to build automated systems that could think for themselves. The business-minded Zelthrons only cared about trade routes and profit margins. But humans could sit still and watch for hours, days, even years. They noticed small details that others missed. They remembered patterns that seemed unimportant at first. This made them perfect for border duty. The consortium leaders had decided 200 years ago when humanity first joined the galactic community. Elena smiled at that thought. "If only they knew the whole truth, Captain," called out Lieutenant Zhang from his sensor station. "I'm picking up some unusual readings from Sector 7. Elena walked over to look at his screen. The display showed a faint energy signature, barely detectable against the background radiation of space. Most species would have dismissed it as cosmic noise. Most species didn't have sensors quite as sensitive as the ones humans had quietly developed. "How long has it been there?" Elena asked. "Just appeared about 10 minutes ago. Very faint, very brief." "Could be nothing," Elena nodded. "Log it and keep monitoring. Send a copy to the archives." Zhang's fingers moved across his controls. The data would join millions of other seemingly insignificant readings that humans had been collecting for decades. Small anomalies, brief signals, tiny variations in stellar radiation. Other species saw this as typical human attention to meaningless details. Elena knew better. 2 centuries ago, humanity had arrived at the edges of consortium space in a small fleet of modest ships. Their delegation had been polite, almost apologetic. They spoke quietly in the great assembly halls where alien races boasted of their achievements. Humans asked for little, just permission to trade, to learn, to coexist peacefully with their galactic neighbors. The other species had been amused by these newcomers. Humans seemed so ordinary compared to the grand civilizations that dominated the galaxy. The Vorthak controlled vast military fleets that could crush entire worlds. The Nexari had technology that bordered on magic, able to manipulate matter at the atomic level. The Zelthrons had economic networks spanning thousands of star systems. What did humans have? They were decent diplomats, good at paperwork, reliable in supporting roles. They became the galaxy's middle managers, translators, and mediators. When different species couldn't agree on something, they called in human negotiators to find compromise solutions. When complex trade agreements needed careful documentation, humans handled the details. It was useful work, but hardly impressive. The great powers of the galaxy saw humans as helpful servants rather than equals. This suited humanity perfectly. Elena's communication officer, Ensign Okafor, looked up from her station. "Captain, we're receiving the weekly report from Earth Central Command." "On screen," Elena said. The holographic display showed Admiral Sarah Chen, a calm woman in her 60s, who had overseen human operations in this sector for the past decade. Like all senior human officers, she projected an image of quiet competence rather than military authority. "Captain Vasquez," Admiral Chen began, "I trust everything remains peaceful in your sector?" "Yes, Admiral. Standard patrols, routine monitoring. The Vorthak passed through yesterday with a small fleet, heading toward the Nexari border. The Zelthrons have increased cargo traffic along the main trade routes by 12%. Nothing unusual?" Admiral Chen nodded. "Excellent. Continue standard operations. Earth sends its regards." The transmission ended. To any alien observer, it would have seemed like a routine check-in between military commanders. They would not have noticed the slight emphasis Chen placed on certain words, or the way Elena's response included specific details about alien fleet movements. Elena returned to her duties, reviewing reports from across the sector. Human observation posts like hers dotted the edges of consortium space, officially tasked with monitoring for pirates, cosmic hazards, and unauthorized border crossings. In reality, they formed the most sophisticated intelligence network the galaxy had ever seen. Every alien ship that passed through human-monitored space was carefully scanned and cataloged. Every new technology, every weapon system, every defensive capability was quietly studied and recorded. Humans had spent 2 centuries learning everything they could about their galactic neighbors while revealing almost nothing about themselves. The Vorthak believed humans were naturally peaceful because they rarely fought. They didn't realize that humans simply saw no point in small conflicts when preparation for larger ones was so much more important. The Nixari thought humans lacked advanced technology because human ships looked simple from the outside. They never suspected what innovations lay hidden beneath those plain exteriors. The Zelthrans assumed humans had limited resources because they traded carefully and never seemed to accumulate great wealth. They didn't understand that humans were investing in things that couldn't be measured in credits. As evening shift began, Elena made her rounds through the station. In the communications center, her officers monitored thousands of channels, listening to alien chatter across dozens of languages. In the sensor array, technicians calibrated equipment that could detect a single ship at the edge of the galaxy. In the data center, analysts processed information that would eventually find its way to Earth and beyond. Lieutenant Commander Torres met her in the corridor outside the main computer core. He was her second in command, a thoughtful man who had served on observation posts for most of his career. "Captain, I've been reviewing the long-range sensor logs," he said quietly. "There's been an increase in anomalous readings over the past month. Very subtle, spread across multiple sectors." Elena stopped walking. "What kind of anomalies?" "Energy signatures that don't match any known technology. They appear briefly, then vanish. Different from anything in our databases." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. Humanity's databases contain detailed information about every known species in the galaxy. If these readings didn't match anything on record, that could mean only one thing. "Compile everything you have," she told Torres. "Send it to Earth on the next secure transmission. Mark it Priority Alpha." Torres nodded and headed back to his station. Elena continued her walk, but her mind was no longer on routine duties. For 200 years, humans had watched and waited and prepared. They had built their networks, gathered their intelligence, and kept their true capabilities hidden from their galactic neighbors. Elena had always known this day might come. The day when all that preparation would be tested. The day when humanity's long silence would finally be broken. She looked out at the stars once more, wondering what was moving in the darkness between them. Whatever it was, humanity would be ready. They had been getting ready for 2 centuries. The question was whether their alien neighbors were ready for what they were about to discover about their quiet, helpful human friends. 3 weeks after the first anomalous readings, the galaxy's worst fears became reality. The unknown contacts were no longer hiding in the dark spaces between stars. They had arrived at the edge of consortium space, and they were not interested in peaceful first contact. The first reports came from Vorthak patrol ships in the Kepler sector. Admiral Thrax, the scarred veteran who commanded the sector fleet, transmitted his initial contact report with the confidence of a warrior who had never known defeat. Unknown vessels detected at grid reference 779. 4 ships of unfamiliar design. They do not respond to standard communication protocols. We are moving to intercept. That was the last transmission from Admiral Thrax's flagship. The entire Vorthak patrol fleet vanished from sensors within minutes of making contact. No distress calls, no battle reports, just sudden silence where 12 heavily armed warships had been moments before. The news spread through consortium communication networks like wildfire. In the Great Assembly Hall on Nexus Prime, representatives from dozens of species gathered for an emergency session. The chamber buzzed with nervous conversation, as holographic displays showed the empty space where the Vorthak fleet had met its end. Ambassador Keltar of the Nexari Collective stood at the central podium, his pale blue skin reflecting the chamber's lights. The Nexari were known for their cold logic and advanced technology. If anyone could understand this threat, it would be them. Initial analysis of the sensor data suggests these intruders possess technology far beyond our current understanding, Keltar announced. Their ships appear to absorb energy-based weapons rather than being damaged by them. Their movement patterns indicate propulsion systems that operate outside known physical laws. A rumble of concerned voices filled the chamber. The Vorthak representative, General Morvac, slammed his fist on his delegation's table. "Cowards strike from the shadows," he roared. "Send the full battle fleet. We will show these invaders the true strength of Vorthak warriors." Ambassador Keltar's expression remained neutral. General, with respect, Admiral Thrax commanded some of your finest ships and most experienced crews. Perhaps a more analytical approach would be wise. From the Zelthran section came the voice of Trade Minister Vexilon, her golden skin shimmering with agitation. Analysis won't protect our trade routes. Every moment we delay costs the Commerce Guild millions of credits. We need decisive action. In the human section, Ambassador David Park sat quietly among his small delegation. The humans had been assigned seats near the back of the chamber, appropriate for their status as junior members of the consortium. Park listened to the debate with the same calm attention he brought to all diplomatic proceedings. Other species barely noticed the humans during these discussions. They were useful for taking notes, organizing committees, and handling minor administrative tasks. But when it came to real decisions about military action or technological solutions, the great powers handled such matters themselves. Park's assistant, Dr. Lisa Wong, leaned over to whisper something in his ear. To observers, it would have looked like a routine exchange of information. They would not have noticed the specific hand signals Park made in response, or the way Dr. Wong's fingers briefly touched the small device on her wrist. Across the galaxy, hidden deep beneath the oceans of Earth, Admiral Chen received the coded transmission in the secure command center that officially didn't exist. The message was brief but clear. The unknown threat had revealed itself, and it was everything humanity had feared it might be. Chen turned to her staff officers, men and women who had spent their careers preparing for this moment. "Initiate Protocol 7, she said simply. Throughout human space, the order spread through channels that existed parallel to the consortium's communication networks. On observation posts like Captain Vasquez's station, routine operations continued as normal. But in hidden facilities, dormant systems came online. Ships that had spent decades disguised as cargo haulers quietly began reconfiguring themselves. Personnel who had lived their entire adult lives as civilians received activation codes they had memorized years earlier. The Mutter invasion fleet that emerged from the void 2 days later defied all previous understanding of military power. Thousands of dark ships materialized at the edges of multiple star systems simultaneously. They moved with perfect coordination, as if controlled by a single intelligence that could think across vast distances. The Vorthak response was swift and predictable. Battle fleets from a dozen sectors converged on the invasion points, ready to meet force with overwhelming force. General Morvac himself led the largest armada in Vorthak history, over 300 ships armed with weapons that could crack planets. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the Vorthak armada was gone, consumed by enemies that seemed to grow stronger with each ship they destroyed. The invaders, who came to be called devourers by panicked civilians, had revealed their terrible nature. They didn't just destroy their enemies, they absorbed them, adding captured technology and knowledge to their own growing power. The Nexari tried a different approach, using their most advanced AI systems to analyze devourer technology and develop countermeasures. For 3 days, their quantum computers worked at maximum capacity, processing data from the failed Vorthak engagement. The computers delivered their verdict with typical Nexari precision. Defeat was mathematically certain unless the consortium could field technology at least 400 years more advanced than their current capabilities. The Zelthran Commerce Guild attempted to solve the problem with their traditional methods, negotiation and economic leverage. They sent diplomatic vessels carrying offers of trade agreements, resource sharing, and mutual prosperity. The Devourers consumed the diplomatic ships just as efficiently as they had consumed the warships. As panic spread through consortium space, civilian populations began fleeing from the outer systems. Refugee ships clogged space lanes as entire worlds evacuated. The great civilizations that had ruled the galaxy for millennia found themselves helpless against an enemy that turned their own strengths against them. In the assembly hall, the debates grew more desperate. Species that had competed for centuries suddenly found themselves allies in the face of extinction. Ancient rivals shared their most guarded military secrets, hoping to find some combination of technologies that could stop the advancing darkness. Ambassador Park continued to attend these sessions, taking careful notes and offering occasional suggestions for refugee coordination and resource allocation. His comments were always practical, focused on logistics rather than strategy. Other delegates nodded politely at his contributions before returning to more important discussions about weapons and battle tactics. They didn't notice that every suggestion Park made was immediately adopted, or that his seemingly minor organizational improvements made the consortium's desperate preparation significantly more efficient. They certainly didn't realize that his questions during technical briefings were extracting precise information about every species' most classified military capabilities. As the Devourer fleet advanced deeper into consortium space, consuming world after world, humanity continued its 2-century-long masquerade. Human ships evacuated civilians alongside alien vessels. Human administrators helped coordinate the massive refugee movement. Human technicians worked around the clock to keep communication networks functioning as the galaxy descended into chaos. To their alien neighbors, humans seemed as shocked and frightened as everyone else. After all, they were just diplomats and bureaucrats. What could they possibly do against an enemy that had destroyed the mightiest fleets in the galaxy? Captain Vasquez stood in her observation post's command center, watching the tactical displays that showed Devourer forces advancing on multiple fronts. Her crew maintained their professional calm, continuing to monitor and record even as the galaxy burned around them. "Captain," Lieutenant Zhang called from his station, "we're receiving new orders from Earth Command." Elena walked over to read the message on Zhang's screen. The words were simple, just a few lines of text that most observers would have dismissed as routine administrative communication. But Elena understood their true meaning. After 200 years of watching and waiting, humanity was about to reveal what they had been hiding beneath their quiet facade. The galaxy was about to learn that humans had been preparing for this day since the moment they first looked up at the stars and wondered what might be looking back. The Devourer advance continued for 2 more weeks, consuming everything in its path. Entire star systems went dark as the ancient enemy fed on the civilizations that had flourished there for thousands of years. The great powers of the consortium threw everything they had at the invaders, only to watch their most advanced weapons become fuel for the enemy's growth. On Nexus Prime, Ambassador Keltar stood before banks of quantum computers that had been running calculations without pause for days. The results were always the same: complete defeat within 6 months, possibly less. The Nexari Collective, with all their technological supremacy, could not find a solution to this problem. In the Vorthak home system, General Morvac gathered the scattered remnants of his people's once mighty fleets. Warriors who had never known defeat now spoke in whispers about an enemy that consumed their ships like a predator devouring prey. The general's scarred face showed the strain of watching his proud civilization crumble. The Zelthran Commerce Guild had abandoned all pretense of profit-seeking. Trade Minister Vexilon now used her vast economic networks to coordinate refugee movements and supply lines for the military effort. Credits and cargo manifests had become meaningless when entire worlds were being erased from existence. In this chaos, one voice remained calm and steady. Ambassador David Park continued to attend the emergency sessions in the assembly hall, offering the same practical suggestions that had marked human participation for 2 centuries. His proposals for refugee distribution and resource allocation were modest, sensible, and immediately effective. What the alien delegates didn't realize was that Park's suggestions were gradually centralizing critical operations under human oversight. Food distribution networks, communication relays, medical supplies, all flowing through systems that humans had quietly volunteered to manage. After all, humans were good at paperwork and logistics. Dr. Lisa Wong sat beside Park during one particularly desperate session, taking notes on a small tablet while the consortium's leaders debated their dwindling options. Her fingers moved across the screen in what appeared to be routine transcription, but she was actually encoding detailed intelligence reports about alien military capabilities, resource reserves, and strategic weaknesses. The information flowed through hidden networks to Earth, where Admiral Chen studied the reports in her underground command center. The picture they painted was exactly what humanity had expected. The great galactic civilizations were powerful but predictable, advanced but rigid in their thinking. The Vorthak fought with honor and courage, but they could only conceive of warfare as direct confrontation between massive fleets. The Nexari approached every problem with cold logic and superior technology, but they struggled to adapt when their calculations proved insufficient. The Zelthrons viewed conflict through the lens of economics and trade, unable to understand an enemy that wanted nothing they could offer. Each species was playing the game they knew best, using strategies that had served them well for millennia. The Devourers, however, had encountered these approaches before. They had consumed countless civilizations over millions of years, learning to counter every form of resistance the galaxy could produce, except one. Captain Vasquez received the new orders while standing in her observation post communication center. The message appeared to be routine maintenance instructions for the sensor array, the kind of technical update that human stations received regularly. But embedded within the technical specifications was a simple phrase that made Elena's heart race. "The children are coming home." She turned to Lieutenant Commander Torres, who was monitoring alien fleet movements on the main display. "Prepare for a full system diagnostic," she told him. "I want all non-essential personnel off duty within the hour." Torres nodded, understanding immediately. Around them, the crew began shutting down routine operations with the same efficiency they brought to everything else. To any observer, it would have looked like standard maintenance procedures. What actually happened was far different. Deep within the observation post's core, hidden systems that had remained dormant for decades suddenly came online. The station's modest exterior concealed layers of technology that none of the consortium species had ever suspected. Sensors that could track individual atoms across star systems. Communication arrays that could penetrate any known jamming system. Defensive shields that operated on principles the galaxy's greatest scientists hadn't even theorized. Most importantly, manufacturing systems began producing items that had been designed centuries earlier, but never built. The station's cargo bays, supposedly filled with routine supplies, actually contained raw materials that could be transformed into anything humanity might need. Similar transformations were taking place across human space. Cargo ships revealed hidden weapon systems. Research stations activated concealed laboratories. Mining facilities began producing alloys that officially didn't exist. On Earth itself, the greatest transformation of all was beginning. Beneath the planet's oceans, vast shipyards that had been built in secret over 2 centuries started their final production runs. The ships taking shape in these hidden facilities bore no resemblance to the modest vessels that other species associated with humanity. Admiral Chen walked through one of these shipyards, watching as automated systems assembled craft that represented the culmination of human military development. Each ship incorporated lessons learned from studying every alien technology, every successful battle tactic, every weakness humanity had observed during their long watch. The vessels were not larger than alien ships. Humans had learned that size was often a disadvantage in space combat. Instead, they were smarter, more adaptable, capable of reconfiguring themselves during battle to meet changing conditions. They carried weapons that could shift between different energy types, armor that could absorb and redirect incoming attacks, and AI systems that could think several moves ahead of any enemy. Most importantly, they were crewed by humans who had spent their entire lives preparing for this moment. Every human child learned military history as thoroughly as they learned mathematics. Every human adult had trained in combat techniques, even if they spent their careers as diplomats or administrators. Every human community had practiced the coordination and cooperation that would be essential when the long-awaited war finally came. The galaxy's other species had grown comfortable and complacent during their centuries of dominance. They had forgotten that the universe was a dangerous place where survival required constant vigilance. Humans had never forgotten this lesson, because they had learned it before they ever left their homeworld. As the first wave of true human warships emerged from their hidden bases, the Devourers encountered something they had not experienced in millions of years: genuine surprise. The ancient enemy had consumed civilizations across the galaxy by learning their patterns and turning their strengths into weaknesses. They had studied Vorthak tactics and found ways to make courage meaningless. They had analyzed Nexari technology and discovered how to corrupt their logic systems. They had observed Zelthran economics and learned to collapse their resource networks, but humans had given them nothing to study. For 2 centuries, humanity had hidden their true nature behind a mask of humble competence. The Devourers had no idea what humans were actually capable of because humans had been very careful never to show their full capabilities to anyone. The trap that humanity had been preparing for 2 centuries was finally ready to spring. The question was whether the rest of the galaxy would survive long enough to see what had been hidden beneath humanity's quiet facade. Captain Vasquez stood on her transformed observation post's new command deck, watching as human ships moved into position throughout the sector. Around her, displays showed information that revealed the true scope of human preparation. Intelligence networks spanning the galaxy, weapon systems that pushed the boundaries of physics, and strategic plans that had been refined through generations of careful study. Elena smiled as she opened a communication channel to the human fleet commanders throughout the region. After 2 centuries of silence, it was finally time for humanity to speak. The first Devourer fleet to encounter true human military power was patrolling the outer edge of the Kepler sector, the same region where Admiral Thrax's Vorthak ships had vanished weeks earlier. The ancient predators moved through space with the confidence of hunters who had never met their match, their dark ships absorbing energy from nearby stars to fuel their endless appetite. They detected the approaching human vessels when they were still several light minutes away. The Devourer collective intelligence analyzed the new contacts with interest. These ships were different from the consortium vessels they had been consuming. Smaller, more refined, with energy signatures that didn't match any known technology in their vast databases. The Devourers prepared to add this new species to their collection of conquered civilizations. They had done this countless times before across millions of years. Every spacefaring race eventually followed the same pattern. They would try to fight, fail, and be absorbed into the ever-growing Devourer collective. But as the human ships entered weapons range, something unprecedented happened. Instead of attacking directly or attempting to flee, the human vessels simply stopped. They hung motionless in space, apparently waiting for something. Admiral Sarah Chen commanded the human fleet from her flagship, a vessel that looked deceptively modest from the outside, but contained technology that would have amazed the galaxy's greatest scientists. She watched the Devourer ships approach on her tactical display, studying their movements with the calm attention of someone who had prepared for this moment her entire life. Analysis complete. Admiral, reported her tactical officer, Commander Jackson. Enemy formation matches pattern 17 from the archives. Recommend response protocol Delta. Chen nodded. The archives contained detailed studies of how the Devourers had approached every previous battle in their recorded history. Human observers had been analyzing fragments of ancient combat data for decades, building a complete picture of how these predators fought. All ships, execute protocol Delta, Chen transmitted to her fleet. Remember, we only get one chance to surprise them. The human ships began to move, but not in any pattern the Devourers recognized. Instead of forming traditional battle lines or attempting evasive maneuvers, they scattered across 3-dimensional space in what appeared to be a random formation. The Devourer collective intelligence tried to process this unexpected behavior. Their weapon systems charged, preparing to demonstrate the futility of resistance as they had done so many times before. Dark energy beams lanced out toward the human ships, the same weapons that had consumed Vorthak battlecruisers and Nexari dreadnoughts. The beams struck their targets and simply vanished. For the first time in eons, the Devourer collective experienced something approaching confusion. Their weapons were designed to drain energy from any target, converting it into fuel for their own systems. Nothing had ever been able to simply absorb their attacks without effect, but human ships had been designed specifically to counter this threat. Their hulls contained adaptive materials that could shift their molecular structure in real time, changing from solid armor to energy-absorbing fields as needed. The technology was based on principles that human scientists had developed by studying Devourer fragments recovered from ancient battlefields. Admiral Chen watched her tactical display as the enemy fleet tried to understand what had just happened. Phase 2, she ordered. Show them what we've learned. The scattered human ships suddenly moved with perfect coordination, their seemingly random positions revealing themselves as carefully calculated firing points. Each vessel targeted a different section of the Devourer formation, but their attacks were synchronized to arrive at exactly the same moment. The weapons that fired were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Instead of energy beams or projectiles, they released bursts of adaptive nanoscale machines that could reconfigure themselves based on their target's defenses. When the Devourers tried to absorb these attacks, The nanomachines simply adapted to exploit whatever absorption method was being used. The ancient predators found their own feeding mechanisms being turned against them. Instead of gaining strength from the attack, they began losing coherence as the nanomachines disrupted their energy flows and communication networks. But Chen knew this was only the beginning. The Devourers' greatest strength was their ability to learn and adapt. They would analyze this attack, develop countermeasures, and return stronger than before. That was why humanity's first strike had to accomplish more than just tactical victory. Initiate full spectrum analysis, Chen commanded. I want every detail of their adaptation process recorded. Throughout the human fleet, sensors that made consortium technology look primitive began collecting data at a rate that would have overwhelmed any other species' processing systems. Every energy fluctuation, every communication pulse, every structural modification the Devourers made in response to human attacks was recorded and analyzed in real time. This was the true purpose of the engagement. Humanity didn't just want to win this battle, they wanted to understand their enemy completely. Every piece of information they gathered would be transmitted to human command centers throughout the galaxy, where it would be used to refine tactics for the larger conflict to come. The Devourer fleet began to retreat, but it was too late. Human ships moved to surround them using propulsion systems that operated on principles the ancient enemy couldn't comprehend. The retreating predators found themselves trapped in a three-dimensional cage of vessels that could match their speed and anticipate their movements. What followed was not a battle in any traditional sense. It was a systematic dissection of the Devourer collective, conducted by humans who had studied their enemy's weaknesses for generations. Each Devourer ship was isolated, analyzed, and carefully dismantled while its crew was captured alive for interrogation. The prisoners were the first Devourers ever taken by any species in millions of years. They were also humanity's key to understanding how the collective intelligence that controlled their enemy actually functioned. News of the human victory spread through consortium space within hours. In the assembly hall on Nexus Prime, alien delegates struggled to process reports that seemed impossible. The modest human ships they had grown accustomed to seeing had somehow defeated an enemy that had crushed the galaxy's mightiest fleets. Ambassador Keltar of the Nexari stood before the emergency session, his usual calm replaced by visible bewilderment. The energy readings from the engagement are unlike anything in our databases, he reported. Human ships appear to have used technology that operates outside known physical laws. General Morvac of the Vorthak pounded his fist on the table. How is this possible? Humans have no military tradition. They are diplomats and bureaucrats, not warriors. Ambassador Park sat quietly in the human section, maintaining the same modest demeanor he had shown for years. When called upon to explain the victory, he simply stated that humanity had been fortunate to develop defensive technologies that proved effective against this particular threat. He did not mention the centuries of preparation, the hidden shipyards, or the vast intelligence network that had made the victory possible. He certainly didn't reveal that this first engagement was merely a test of human capabilities, designed to gather information for the real war that was about to begin. The other species wanted to understand how humans had achieved the impossible, but Park deflected their questions with the same diplomatic skill he had always shown. Humanity was willing to share some defensive technologies with their allies, he explained, but many details would have to remain classified for security reasons. What he didn't tell them was that the defensive technologies were actually weapons systems so advanced that sharing them would have fundamentally altered the balance of power in the galaxy. Humanity had no intention of revealing the full extent of their capabilities until the Devourer threat was completely eliminated. As the session ended, delegates from across the consortium gathered around the human section, desperate for any information that might help them survive the ongoing invasion. Park and his team answered their questions patiently, offering just enough assistance to maintain their allies' hope while revealing nothing about humanity's true nature. Meanwhile, deep in space, Admiral Chen's fleet was already moving toward their next objective. The Devourers had been given their first taste of human military power, and they would undoubtedly respond with greater force. Chen was counting on it. The ancient enemy was about to learn that humans had been preparing for this war since before they ever left their homeworld. Every battle they had fought throughout their own violent history had been a lesson in how to defeat enemies who seemed impossible to beat. Now it was time for the real test to begin. The Devourer response came 3 weeks later, and it was everything Admiral Chen had hoped for. The ancient enemy had analyzed their defeat in the Kepler sector and concluded that humanity represented a genuine threat to their expansion. For the first time in millions of years, they committed their primary command fleet to eliminate a single species. The massive armada that emerged from the void dwarfed anything previously seen in consortium space. Thousands of Devourer ships arranged themselves in complex formations that stretched across multiple star systems. At their center moved vessels so large they could have consumed entire moons, carrying the collective intelligence that had orchestrated the conquest of countless civilizations. The consortium's remaining fleets gathered to meet this ultimate threat, but their leaders knew it was hopeless. The combined military might of all surviving species represented less than 10% of what the Devourers had just brought to bear. Mathematical analysis suggested the final battle would last less than 6 hours. In the assembly hall on Nexus Prime, delegates from across the galaxy made their final speeches before evacuating to emergency shelters. Ambassador Keltar of the Nexari spoke with the calm precision his species was known for. Even in the face of extinction, we have calculated a 0.3% probability of survival, he announced to the gathered representatives. While these odds are statistically insignificant, the Nexari Collective will continue to resist until our final ship is consumed. General Morvac of the Vorthak stood with the bearing of a warrior who had accepted death, but would not yield. The Vorthak Empire dies as it lived, with honor and courage. Our ships will fight until the last warrior draws breath. Trade Minister Vexlon of the Zelthrons had already liquidated her species' vast financial networks, converting everything into resources for the final battle. The Commerce Guild's fleets stand ready. If we must fall, we will make our enemy pay dearly for the privilege. When the session turned to humanity, all eyes focused on Ambassador Park. The quiet diplomat who had served the consortium faithfully for decades stood slowly, carrying himself with the same modest dignity he had always shown. Humanity appreciates the courage our allies have displayed in this dark hour, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. We are honored to stand beside such brave souls in what may be our final moments. He paused, looking around the assembly hall at representatives from dozens of worlds and species. Many of these beings had barely acknowledged human existence for 2 centuries. Now they hung on his every word, hoping for some miracle that could save them all. However, Park continued, humanity believes there may still be reason for hope. The chamber erupted in excited murmurs. Even the possibility of survival was enough to electrify delegates who had been preparing for death. Ambassador Keltar leaned forward, his analytical mind seizing on this unexpected development. Ambassador Park, what information do you possess that our combined intelligence networks have missed? Park smiled slightly, the first genuine emotion he had shown in years of diplomatic proceedings. For 2 centuries, humanity has served the consortium faithfully in our designated roles. We have been your diplomats, your administrators, your observers. We have asked for little and given much. He gestured to the holographic displays showing the approaching Devourer fleet. But we have also been students. We have watched and learned from every species in this great alliance. The Vorthak taught us courage and tactical thinking. The Nexari showed us the power of advanced technology and logical analysis. The Zelthrons demonstrated the importance of planning and resource management. The delegates listened with growing confusion. This sounded like a farewell speech, not a battle plan. Most importantly, Park continued, we learned from the Devourers themselves. Every fragment of ancient technology, every historical record of their previous conquests, every scrap of data from their recent victories, humanity has studied it all. Dr. Wong stood beside him, activating a holographic projector that filled the chamber with tactical displays unlike anything the consortium had ever seen. The images showed detailed schematics of Devourer technology, battle formations, and strategic patterns stretching back millions of years. We know how they think, Park explained. We know how they fight. We know their strengths, their weaknesses, and most importantly, we know their one critical flaw. Ambassador Keltar stared at the displays with growing amazement. This level of analysis would require centuries of dedicated research by thousands of specialists. Indeed, Park agreed. which is why humanity began this project before we ever left our home system. The truth was finally revealed. Humanity's cautious approach to galactic civilization hadn't been born from natural timidity or lack of ambition. It had been a carefully planned intelligence operation spanning 2 centuries, designed to gather every piece of information needed to defeat the one enemy that truly mattered. The ancient records spoke of the Devourers, the shadow that had fallen across the galaxy again and again throughout history. Every spacefaring civilization eventually faced them, and every civilization had fallen. But those civilizations had fought alone, each using their own methods and technologies. Humanity had done something different. They had waited, watched, and learned from everyone who might eventually stand against the darkness. When the time came, they would fight not as humans, but as the inheritors of every successful military tradition the galaxy had ever produced. The final battle began in the Centaurus sector, where Admiral Chen's fleet met the full might of the Devourer Armada. The enemy came expecting to face desperate defenders making their last stand. Instead, they encountered something that should have been impossible. The human ships that emerged to meet them incorporated the best innovations of every known species. Vorthak courage guided their tactics, but refined by Nexari logic and supported by Zelthran resource management. The vessels themselves were marvels of adaptive engineering, capable of reconfiguring during battle to counter any threat. But the real surprise was the fleet's size. For every ship the consortium had detected in human space, 10 more emerged from hidden bases throughout the galaxy. The modest cargo vessels and research stations that aliens had ignored for decades revealed themselves as sophisticated warships in disguise. The Devourers found themselves facing an enemy that knew their every move before they made it. Human commanders anticipated their tactics because they had studied every previous Devourer campaign. Human weapons were specifically designed to counter Devourer defenses because humanity had been preparing for this exact confrontation since before they achieved spaceflight. Most importantly, the humans fought with a coordination that the collective intelligence of the Devourers couldn't match. Each ship was crewed by individuals who could think for themselves while working perfectly with their comrades. It was a combination of independence and cooperation that the hive-minded enemy couldn't comprehend or counter. The battle raged across multiple star systems for 3 days. When it ended, the Devourer fleet was gone, not consumed but completely destroyed. The ancient threat that had terrorized the galaxy for millions of years had finally met an enemy that was more patient, more prepared, and more adaptable than themselves. As news of the victory spread through consortium space, the surviving alien civilizations struggled to understand what had just happened. The quiet humans who had served them so faithfully had somehow accomplished the impossible. They had defeated an enemy that had consumed entire galactic civilizations. In the aftermath, humanity returned to its previous role with characteristic modesty. Ambassador Park resumed his position as a diplomatic representative, speaking softly and asking for little. Human ships went back to their routine patrols and cargo runs. Human administrators continued managing the paperwork that kept interstellar civilization functioning. But now everyone understood the truth beneath the facade. Humanity's greatest strength had never been their technology or their weapons. It was their ability to prepare for threats that others couldn't even imagine, to learn from everyone around them, and to hide their true capabilities until the moment when nothing less than everything would be enough. Captain Vasquez stood on her observation post's command deck, watching as the galaxy slowly returned to normal. The hidden weapon systems had been quietly powered down. The secret manufacturing facilities had returned to dormant status, and the vast intelligence network had resumed its patient watch. Elena smiled as she looked out at the stars. Somewhere in the darkness between them, new threats might already be stirring. But humanity would be ready, just as they had always been ready. The galaxy's other species would continue to see humans as helpful diplomats and skilled administrators. They would never know about the hidden fleets, the secret bases, or the centuries of preparation that had made their survival possible. That was exactly how humanity preferred it. After all, the best weapon was one your enemy never saw coming.